Hey guys, hope you're well. I wanted to do a quick live stream at the end of the day today. Didn't have time to do any live streams this afternoon because I was moving from the RV to a new Airbnb. I've got a house lined up on a golf course, got a great office, and I actually purposely rented a house that not only had an office but had carpet in the office. And that's going to help with the audio. So I know a lot of my interviews, you guys are accustomed to hearing a really bad echo and bad audio. So hopefully I'm going to fix that with this new house that I'm renting next week. But until that time, I had to get a little Airbnb. So I was just kind of moving in and getting things set up to try to do a small whiteboard video tomorrow. But in doing some research, I wanted to go over a couple ideas. And the first is to explore some of the past hyperinflations we have seen throughout history. Let me go ahead and do a screen share and move over to this article from Investopedia. And this is just simply worst cases of hyperinflation in history. These countries top the list for the worst inflation. And they just bring up that Venezuela's annual inflation rate for 2019 would be an astonishing 200,000%. And then it goes on to say, considering the central banks like the U.S. Federal Reserve, European Central Bank aim for an annual inflation around 2 to 3%, Venezuela's currency and economy are in crisis. More on that in a moment. And I guess the conventional marker or definition of hyperinflation is 50% per month. And this is really a moving target. There's a lot of different definitions for hyperinflation. But I thought this was interesting, proposed by Philip Kagan, 1956, professor of economics at Columbia. So we know what hyperinflation is. The first example they use is Hungary, August 1945 to July 1946. The highest monthly inflation rate got to 4.19 times 10 to the 16th power percent. I have no idea what that is. I don't even know what math I got through in high school. I think I got into one math class and the higher one, and I hated it. So I dropped down into a lower one that was easier, and it really pissed my teachers off because they knew that I could handle a much harder class, but I took the easy one anyway, just because I didn't want any homework. But anyway, some easier terms to understand. Equivalent daily inflation rate, 207%. Time required for prices to double. Let me read that one more time. Time required for prices to double. 15 hours. Isn't that incredible? This is what's really fascinating, and I think it applies to today and kind of what I wanted to go over broadly, or more broadly in this video. While hyperinflation is generally considered to be the result of government ineptitude and fiscal irresponsibility, the hyperinflation of post-war Hungary was apparently engineered by the government policymakers. They actually wanted hyperinflation. Why? As a way to get a war-torn economy back on its feet. So they I don't know if they wanted hyperinflation, probably wouldn't go that far, but they definitely wanted inflation. This was the Keynesian mindset that if we can just get inflation and we can spark consumer spending and people taking on debt, then oh my gosh, this is going to be a windfall and the economy is going to boom as a result. Unfortunately, once they got that inflation genie out of the bottle, they could not get her back in. The government used inflation as a tax to help with a revenue deficit needed for post-war reparation payments. Sound familiar? We might not have post-war reparation payments, but we definitely have a massive debt problem and huge annual deficits. And we can't inflate. Luke Gromen made a great point the other day when I was listening to him on a podcast with, I think, Grant Williams. And he said that most of the debt for the United States government is off balance sheet, in the sense that it's what we owe retirees, Social Security, Medicare. And you can't inflate that away, because we don't really owe them money. If you look at Medicare as an example, we don't really owe them money. We owe them services. So regardless of the price of those services, we still owe it to them. So this whole thing that the government owes it to ourselves, therefore we might be able to inflate away the debt, we'll pay it back, but it'll be with reduced dollars, therefore we can handle it. That's only an argument if you look at what's on balance sheet. But again, as Luke pointed out, the majority of the government debt is off balance sheet debt. It's what we owe retirees in the form of services. It's one thing. So anyway, so this is not something new. The government trying to create inflation to bail themselves out of a spending problem. We've seen this over and over and over and over again throughout history. What I thought was really interesting is this last sentence, that the government tried to create inflation for another reason, to serve as a stimulant for aggregate demand in order to restore productive capacity. Where have you heard that one before? We need government to spend more money to boost aggregate demand during the time of a recession. We need to send out stimmy checks in order to boost aggregate demand to get through this unprecedented time that we're dealing with right now, because that's going to boost demand, boost consumption. Therefore, in the Keynesian mind, that has to restore productive capacity. Completely ignoring taxes, completely ignoring regulation, completely ignoring distortions, misallocations of resources, malinvestment, all these things that are required to or go into producing goods and services. It's almost like they see the economy and human beings as kind of like a video game. Like, all you need to do is move they don't have a joystick anymore, but if you're playing a video game in an arcade or something like that, all you do is move the stick forward and the player goes forward. You move it to the left, the player goes to the left. The player doesn't argue with you, or the little guy on the screen doesn't argue with you. He doesn't have emotions. He doesn't go to sleep. He doesn't have a family. He doesn't have opinions. He doesn't have incentives. He just does exactly what you tell him to do. It's a computer game. That's how Keynesians see human beings in the real economy, as though they're just a computer game, that all we have to do is push the stick forward. We get more aggregate demand, and boom, all the little characters in the video game just start producing a lot more goods and services. It's like magic. No matter how many regulations you burden them with, no matter how many taxes that you apply to their income, no matter what you do to distort the economy, they're just going to create more goods and services, because that's what they're programmed to do. As you guys know, in real life, it doesn't work that way. So moving on, the next one that we all know about, of course, is Zimbabwe, March 2007 to mid-November 2008. And their equivalent, oh, wow. So it's getting much better. their daily inflation rate only got up to about 100%. And the time required for prices to double only got up to 24 hours. So this is way better than Hungary. But it goes down the list, and I think the next one is, what is the next one here? So Zimbabwe, okay, and then Yugoslavia in the early 1990s. But my point is a couple things. Number one, when countries go through this hyperinflation, it destroys everything. It is a proper economic collapse. I mean, it is the definition of an economic collapse. And if I asked any of you on this live stream right now, let's see, there's 232 people, you could probably think of a few more examples of hyperinflation that in a country that resulted in an economic collapse. I mean, a total collapse, not just kind of a recession that we got high unemployment. I'm talking about massive starvation. I'm talking about what we're seeing right now in Venezuela. Basically hell on earth. So I'm sure that you guys could think of a few more examples. How many examples can you think of where deflation produced an economic collapse to the same degree that a hyperinflation did? I mean, the worst deflation that any of you can probably think of would be the 1930s in the United States. And can anyone honestly say that that was as bad as what we saw in Yugoslavia or in Zimbabwe or in Venezuela? Of course not. Probably the only other example you can think of would be Japan. And you're going to tell me that Japan, the deflation that they've been dealing with for, call it 3 decades, is as severe as what Venezuela has been dealing with for the past decade? Of course not. Of course not. Yet at the same time, these central planners and central bankers are doing everything they can to create the illusion that deflation is this boogeyman that we have to avoid at all costs. And therefore, we should strive for, they say 2% inflation, but as you guys know, they move the goalposts on that constantly. Well, we want to get it up to 2% inflation. Then they get there. Oh, well, yeah, we actually want to average it. Oh, we're going to let it run hot. No, we're going to do this. Oh, we're going to change the way that we measure the CPI. Oh, we're going to do this. Oh, we're going to change that. Right? It's always a moving target. The fact that anyone in the mainstream media takes these people seriously or they have any credibility left is completely beyond me. I was watching a short video, like a 5-minute video with Ben Bernanke today. And it was a more recent video, not when he was Fed chair. And they were talking about the mistakes that were made back in the GFC. And you remember Bernanke said, oh, it's isolated to just subprime mortgages. I mean, he just got it way, 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 way wrong. And this wasn't the particular interview. The interview I was actually looking for was one that Schiff was talking about, where Bernanke actually said, they said, listen, did you just get it wildly wrong back then? Or were you lying? What was the deal? And he said, well, when you're working at the Fed, you've got to toe the party line. And at the time Bush was in office, and he's a Republican, so he can't just come out and say that we've got this massive housing crisis. He's got to come out and paint a rosy picture. And he didn't come out and say it directly, but that's what he was implying. So again, how do these central bankers have any credibility in the mainstream media? Any at all? And then this individual who was interviewing Bernanke this time was talking to him about the GFC. And Bernanke was just saying, well, it's something that just no one could have seen coming. And we've got we've got all these research analysts at the Federal Reserve. And then he had the balls to say that the research analysts working at the Federal Reserve are the best economic forecasters in the world, in the entire world. The PhDs and the research analysts working at the Fed are the best economic forecasters. And he said that with a straight face. I mean, these people are lying to us direct with a grin on their face. They're lying through their teeth. And the media and 99% of the average Joe and Janes out there just take them at their word, and they give them just another chance. They have like selective amnesia that they just want to forget all the horrible predictions that the Fed has never gotten any prediction right. None. Zero. They've got a 0% batting average, but somehow we forget about that. And as a society and as the financial media always just pretends that they're like omnipresent, or they're just all knowing at all times. It's shocking. But that's what I wanted to point out. And I need to give a hat tip to Lynn Alden, because she mentioned this in our interview the other day. I don't know if this was part of what we recorded or not, but it's such a great point when you think about it. How many economies have collapsed due to hyperinflation? How many have collapsed due to deflation? And is the Fed openly trying to create inflation? And are they openly painting deflation to be some sort of boogeyman? If so, why? You got to sit there and scratch your head a bit. And then I've been talking about this a lot. I talk about this a lot in videos, and I'm going to try to emphasize it tomorrow in a little video I'm doing with this. I just bought this little teeny whiteboarded office video. It's just kind of a makeshift thing. But I think it's one of the biggest misunderstandings that we have as a society when it comes to economics. And we somehow believe that just sending people currency units makes society richer. And we talked about this last night, I know. So I won't beat a dead horse. But let me just show you. I don't know if I can. Oh, I probably can't do it. I was going to take the computer over there and just show you this little makeshift whiteboard that I set up. Let me see if I can do that really quick. This is just a little teeny weeny Airbnb. It's kind of like a hotel room, but I just set it up. I bought this little whiteboard. I put it on the. Oh yeah, you can see it right there. I put it on the door to the bathroom. So that's improvising at its best. And I just set up a couple lights here so it looks decent. But anyway, so let me go over here. You can see, oh, there you go. So you can, oh, this isn't working too well, is it? Let me try to hold it in position. And then, but you can see right here, oh, this is really hard to do. You've got this farmer guy. And in order to consume, what does he have to do? He has to produce. he has to produce stuff. So then what he does is he tries to, he starts with like a hoe or something or a shovel. And then he goes and he tries to save money or save purchasing power to buy like a mule and then maybe a tractor to produce more stuff. Because if he's able to produce more than he consumes, that's how he builds wealth. Okay. And then we go over to this side. And if all these farmers are able to do the same thing and become more productive, it allows these other people in the economy to do other things. They don't have to farm, but they still have to produce to consume. This guy is becomes a construction worker. This person becomes a teacher. This person becomes a doctor. And the reason they're able to do this is because these people are producing more than they consume. And they're always constantly trying to increase their productivity because that's how they become wealthier. Now I'll just take this marker right here. What if this society, I don't know if you can see this, but what if this society in total had we'll call it $1 million in the entire economy? All right. And then how rich would they be? Well, they've still got the same amount of stuff, but what happens if a month later we 10x'd it? So now we printed another, we'll call it $9 million. So now they've got 10 million in the economy circulating. How much richer is this economy? None. It doesn't matter whether they've got $1 million circulating or 10 million. Who cares? They don't care how much money's circulating. The only thing that matters is how much stuff that they're producing. If they're producing the same amount of stuff, it doesn't matter if there's 1 million, 10 million, 1 billion, a quadrillion. It doesn't matter. They're not any wealthier. The only thing that makes them wealthier is how much they can produce. That's it. And for some reason, I'll go back to, I'm sure you guys are probably dizzy from walking around. But for some reason, people just can't grasp that. They just think that if the society starts with $1 million and has $10 million, well, they have to be wealthier. They've got to be super rich now. No. And let's take it to the next step. Let's just assume I went from that example, I went from 1 million to 10 million in the economy. Well, what if we went to $10 million circulating in the economy, but they actually produced fewer goods and services? Let's say one of the farmers got sick or something like that, and or the crops didn't pan out, or he wasn't able to produce as much corn. Well, then if he can't produce enough corn for the little society, now all of a sudden that person that's doing the doctoring or the teachers or the construction work, well, they don't have enough to eat. They need corn. Therefore, they need to grow their own corn, which is going to take time away from teaching or doctoring or building houses. You see? So just because the society now has $10 million floating around, they are poorer than they were before. The amount of currency units doesn't make a difference. We've got to get out of this thinking that we can just get rich by the government sending everyone money. That's not the way it works. The way we get rich is by producing more stuff. And if you think about what the government is doing right now, they're paying people not to produce. They're paying them to stay home and not produce any goods or services. So what do you think that does to the economy long term? It's as simple as that little whiteboard I just showed you. You reduce the amount of cows, you reduce the amount of cotton, the amount of corn, we get poorer. Simple as that. But yet, for some reason, people can't understand that. So that's what we're going to be going over in tomorrow's whiteboard video. And then we're going to be combining that idea with, unfortunately, the understanding from reading Road to Serfdom that as you increase the stimulus and as you increase the dependence upon the government, you increase their power. And if you increase the power of the government, you are incentivizing the people to run for office who you don't want to be there. Right? We've been talking a lot about Germany, pre-war Germany. Let's just say for a moment that the German government in the early 1930s really had about the same amount of power as the US government did in the late 1700s, which is to say pretty much zero power. Do you think Hitler ever would have ran for office? No, he couldn't have done anything. What are you going to do if why do you want to be president or whatever they're called, chancellor or something in Germany? Why do you want to be that guy if they have no power? If what you seek is power. You see? That's the key. The more power you give the government, the more people you'll have working in government that are motivated by power and the desire to control other people. There's no secret why back in during the time of the Constitution and whatnot, those guys that were there, they had other gigs, they had other jobs. They were like lifetime politicians. Why? Because the government didn't have any power or had very little power, the federal government. And therefore, you had people that were in government that didn't really care about the power. They cared about doing what's right. They cared about intellectual honesty. They cared about debate. They cared about the future. Now what you do is you give the government more and more and more power, and you don't incentivize people like George Washington or Thomas Jefferson or Benjamin Franklin or fill in the blank, who's ever your favorite founding father. You don't encourage those people to apply for the gig. You encourage maniacs and sociopaths to apply for the gig. And unfortunately, sooner or later, you're going to get one of those sociopaths that gets elected. You see, a lot of people, and I'm sure a lot of your friend and family member Freds, are very in favor of government lockdowns. bringing it to today's day and age. Oh, the government needs to have power because people are just too stupid to do the right thing. They're too stupid to understand the science. And they're going to go out and they're going to, they're going to jog and they're going to walk their dog and they're going to go out on the beach and, they're going to leave the confines of their home, and then they're just going to ruin it for everyone because they're too stupid to lock themselves in their own house. Therefore, we need the government to come in. We need to give them dictator-like power so they can control all these dumb rubes that aren't smart enough to lock themselves in their bathroom for the next 4 years. That's basically the argument. What these people don't understand is although the current person or people in charge are taking the power you want them to have to do what you want them to do, they're not given that power back. So what ends up happening is when the next guy or gal or group of people are in charge, they're most likely going to do something and institute a law that you don't like. And it could be someone that you despise. But now, what are you going to do? You already gave the government all that power and all that control. So now the person you hate is in charge, and they're making your life miserable as a result, with all the laws and rules that they're instituting. You see, the pendulum goes both ways. So then what it has to happen is we just have to sit there and cross our fingers that just every single time, or for the rest of our lives, there's some sort of benevolent dictator that we like in office. The problem is you're playing with fire right there. Because yes, it's true, you may get that benevolent dictator, but you may also get Hitler. So what's the alternative? The alternative is to limit the size of government to where it doesn't have any power. We get rid of the central planning. The federal government is very, very limited. They don't have any power. Therefore, you don't have any lobbyists. You don't have any corporations trying to manipulate the politicians. Why? Because the politicians don't have any goodies to give out to the corporations or the teachers' unions or whomever is trying to access political favors. There are no political favors to access. You get better people in the government, and then you don't have to worry about some crazy getting control. Because even if that crazy gets control, they can't do anything with it. Because the federal government has no power to begin with. So this is kind of incorporating just super basic economics into what we're dealing with today as far as these stimulus checks, and then layering over, at least what I'm trying to do, is layer over the road to serfdom. Specifically, I'm not sure which chapter it was, but it was the chapter, and I've got the table of contents right here. It was the chapter, I think it's chapter 10, Why the Worst Get to the Top. And I was listening to an interview with Milton Friedman, and he said that this was actually his favorite chapter of the entire book. So let's think about why the worst rise to the top in government, and ask ourselves if government had far less control over our lives and far less power. See, it benefits everybody. It doesn't matter if you're on the right, on the left. It just doesn't matter. It benefits you to have government. Eventually, it will benefit you to have government smaller. And then we base our society and our decision making on principles. We don't base them just on some random whim as to what we think is right or wrong based on what we had for breakfast that morning. I mean, think about why Ron Paul was so correct and so right, and what made him amazing. Whether it was in the 1970s, 1980s, I mean, it doesn't matter. Why did he garner so much respect from everybody, people on the left and right, and young, old, everyone in between? It's because he had principles that guided his decision making. So when it came to the Iraq War and invading Saddam Hussein, as an example, for you young people back then to stand up and say, I'm against the Iraq War, that was wildly unpopular at the time. Those of you who remember back that far, you know exactly what I'm saying. It was incredibly unpopular. Ron Paul did it, right? Why was he able? Why did he have the strength to stand up when everyone else was against him? Everyone else was calling him crazy. Everyone else was calling him weak. Everyone else was calling him stupid, washed up, whatever. Why was he able to stand up and say, you know, I don't care what they say. I believe this. It's because he could fall back on his principles. The problem is that when you look at the way they respond to things, or their mentality on the left and right, both Republicans are just as bad as the Democrats when it comes to this. They have no principles. None. Zero. Look at the Republicans. They say, oh, we don't want a $4 trillion stimulus package. We just want a $3 trillion. How can you defend that? You can't. Because what are you saying, that 4 trillion's bad, but 3 trillion's good? That's ridiculous. It's because they're not arguing from a position of principle. And that's one of the main reasons why I think libertarianism is often correct, because it intellectually makes more sense, because it's based on principles. It's not just based on how we feel waking up this morning and, oh, should we spend 80 trillion or 1 trillion? Oh, I don't know. Maybe let's spend 50 trillion. Now that's just do it right in the middle. That's always what's best. Like, how did you come to that conclusion? Like, should we lock down? Should we do this? Should we do this? Well, I don't know. I mean, the data right now is saying lock down. We just had a big spike in cases of lockdown. Well, how did you come to that conclusion? Well, I don't know. Fauci said so. There's no rhyme or reason to it. It's utterly random. And if things are completely random, how can we not expect to get terrible results? Whereas if you're Ron Paul, going back to, call it the beginning of the cerveza sickness, say February, March 2020, I listened to podcasts with Dr. Paul. He says he didn't think it was that bad. He didn't know. But the one thing that he stood his ground, he said the government should not get involved. And I'll pat myself on the back there that I got in some very difficult conversations on podcasts where I was being interviewed. And back then, you didn't know any of the data. I think I said this last night. You had no clue how bad it was going to be. No clue. It could have wiped out half the population. Oh, you didn't know, right? But fortunately, I was able to fall back on my principles and say, listen, regardless of how bad this is going to be, and we'll pray for the best, we can't let the government get involved. The decision on what to do needs to be in the hands of the individual, so they can decide what they want to do, what's best for them and their family and their community. That's it. And then let the chips fall where they may. And in my opinion, now that the data is crystal clear, when you look at state to state, when you look at everything, that was the 100% correct plan of attack. Have the government give people the data and let them make decisions themselves as grown adults that should have the ability to choose how much risk they want to take or not take with their own personal health. Anyway, like Hayek points out in Road to Serfdom, whether you want to call it socialism, whether you want to call it welfareism, whatever, people point at Sweden as an example of socialism. By a textbook definition, it's not. It's not even close. They don't control the means of production there, but they are a welfare state. And Hayek acknowledged both definitions, and he pointed out that both lead to serfdom, which is totalitarianism, right? Both of them lead to totalitarianism, but one leads there slowly. One leads there a hell of a lot quicker. Welfare still gets you there, but it just gets you there slowly. But it's not a foregone conclusion. There are several countries, as an example, that started going down that path and then shifted and went another direction. The United States is a great example of that. I was listening to another interview with Milton Friedman today, where he was talking about how the general attitude in the United States towards central planning and socialism back in the early 1960s. And he said when he first came out with his ideas on free market and everything that we know and love Milton Friedman for, they were wildly unpopular because the United States was going towards that central planning narrative. That's what everyone thought was correct. Think about it. Back then, we hadn't seen the fall of Russia. We hadn't seen how much of a disaster communism was in places like China. So now hindsight's 2020. But back then, there were people that argued that that's the direction the United States should go. A lot of people. And still, although it was completely hostile, the environment was completely hostile to Milton Friedman's ideas back in the early 1960s. By the 1970s and the 1980s, we went a different direction. And if it's possible to do it back then, I personally believe it's possible to do it now. But it requires society to think critically about what is happening and hopefully make some good decisions here. So I'll go ahead and leave you with that, guys. I went on a lot longer than I wanted to, and I need to get ready for tomorrow's video, and I've got to eat some dinner. It'll be quite challenging tomorrow because it's just this little teeny, you guys saw how teeny the whiteboard is, and it kind of cramped space, and it's awkward, and the acoustics here are going to be pretty bad. But it's all about the content. Next week, it's going to get a whole lot better when I'm able to set up a permanent kind of location that I'll have for 3 or 4 months. I've got a nice office. It's got carpet in there, like I said, so the acoustics are going to be really awesome. I'm going to get a giant whiteboard, and we're going to crank out some awesome content and some fantastic whiteboard videos. So bear with me this week. We'll just do this kind of makeshift thing, and next week it's going to get awesome. Okay, let me do some shout outs. We got Harry Hunter, Jason Kincaid, Mona Vick, Daniel J, Miku, Medhead 101, Seymour Rivers, Kevin Glick, Jim Wolf, Unknown Alberton, Chad. Oh, I can't say that, Chad. He tried to throw me a curveball there. Dominic, Don Quixote, Johnny Midnight, Samur Rahan, Leonardo Alberto Martinez Roman. We got Peter Frowen in the house, All-Nighter Hider, Brendan O'Brien, none of your beeswax, Crazy Legs, Bobcat Bren, Girth Inertia, Pork Barrel Investing, Joy Lou, Joshua Nofsky, Chuck I should be able to pronounce that. Chuck Mowry. That's not too hard. Datamine. All right, guys. Oh, and then Moody's here. And Value Stonks. Yeah, a lot of the usuals. Thanks for hanging out with me, guys. And I'll see you on the next video.